Despite Eddie Howe saying he wanted Newcastle United to be dynamic and quick in the transfer market, they returned to pre-season training today without a new signing through the door. On today's episode of NUFC Transfer Daily, we'll be looking at the latest on the deals that they are chasing, a crucial stat which gives insight into why Anthony Elanga is a priority, and looking at another defensive option who was linked over the weekend. Let's get into it. Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Thanks so much to everybody who subscribed. Please do, if you haven't already, and hit like on the video. It really does help. Apologies again for the state of my voice. I've not been well over the weekend. I think you could probably hear I've actually got worse than I was on Friday. I hope it's not too much of a distraction for you. Today we're going to be discussing Anthony Elanga. We're going to be discussing Giorgio Scalvini. We're going to be discussing Antonio Silva as well, again another link with him, and also a potential addition to the coaching staff, which will be really interesting as well. But as I said in the intro, Newcastle will return to pre-season training today. Just the non-internationals who have come in for testing. There's been an update on the fitness situation. Lewis Hall is targeting a return against Aston Villa on the opening day. Joe Linton looks to be back as well. His recovery from the knee issue which kept him out at the back end of last season is going well, so he looks like he should be in contention for at least parts of this pre-season, as well as obviously the game against Villa on the opening day as well. But yeah, we're going to focus on Anthony Elanga, and as I said on Friday's video, I hope Newcastle would have made a bit more progress by today and that the deal would have been almost done. I think some inside the club thought that as well, but Newcastle have not been able to make the breakthrough quite yet. Elanga, the deal on the table is still £55 million. There's discussions over maybe a little bit about the structure, but also Forest is still hoping to get closer to 60 million. Maybe it'll be 55 plus add-ons. What I really want to talk about with Anthony Elanga is we know that he's likely to join. I know that there's some nerves, and there'll be some of you in the comment section who are quite concerned about the lack of development over the weekend. These things take time. Newcastle are targeting players who clubs don't want to sell, who are in strong positions. Forest have their reasons to keep him. They've tried to keep him by all accounts. They've had discussions with him by the sounds of it. Floating of that idea seems to have cooled off, which suggests to me that he is very much open to Newcastle and he will be in the black and white shirt next season. There's one really intriguing stat that we're going to talk about today, and that is that according to transfermarket.com, which is a really great website that gives really detailed profiles of pretty much every player in Europe in terms of transfer value, contract length, stats. He's never had an injury in his entire career. I don't know if that's actually true. It's very difficult to verify it beyond this, but he's only missed 2 games in 2 years for Nottingham Forest in the Premier League. Didn't miss a single game last season, which is really impressive. And when you consider that, that is a real reason why I think Newcastle have pushed forward for this deal, because they're really keen to add a player who they can trust, especially Eddie Howe. You consider that Newcastle are going back into the Champions League, and last time they played in that competition, it decimated their squad. They had an injury crisis that was basically generational. They had no subs that they were able to use, the same 10 players playing pretty much every week through the entire autumn fixture list, and it bit them hard. If they can get a player in who theoretically they could trust to be available all the time, and I always remember a quote from an interview Anthony Gordon did with the Mail where he says availability is the best ability, and that is really true, especially when you consider that Eddie Howe has that trust in Bruno Guimaraes, who has barely missed a game over the last sort of 3-4 years for Newcastle. And it's really shown. Newcastle's record without Bruno still is not particularly strong. If Newcastle had that with Anthony Elanga, it would really make a difference. And it's really interesting when you look at his physique and you look at the way he plays, how springy he is, how quick he is, how dynamic he is. You would imagine that he'd be littered with muscle problems. You'd imagine that he'd have to deal with those things across his entire career. When you think back to Newcastle having similar players, Alan St-Maximin constantly had those issues. Kieran Dyer and Craig Bellamy, going back 20 years to Sir Bobby Robson's era, were constantly battling hamstring problems, groin issues. The fact that Elanga has never had anything like that is really impressive. And there's a video that went viral effectively showing his training routine. I think that this is a huge reason why Newcastle have opted to go for Anthony Elanga when they know that they have to pay a premium, because the fact that, you know, the money that they are now, the money that they've put on the table for Elanga is in the realm of Sandro Tonali and Alexander Isak. Do we think he has the same sort of level of ceiling as them? I certainly don't, as I said last week. But when you think about his contract situation at Nottingham Forest, his age, his output, his Premier League experience, and then you throw this crazy stat about his injury record in there as well, it's very, very difficult from a Nottingham Forest perspective to say that they shouldn't sell him, that they should sell him for less. And I think that that's why Newcastle are committed to paying a real premium fee, because the stats are saying that they can really trust him to play every game, week in, week out. As much as they need him, he'll be there because he doesn't get injured. And as I say, if you haven't seen the video of him training, it's really intense. It really shows his power and strength. He's a little bit different than most players of his position. He's very strong on the weights, he's very strong on the sprint drills as well, and that's clearly had a massive impact on his ability to stay fit. Looking back at the likes of Bruno Guimaraes, and it was really quite ironic that Anthony Gordon said that just before getting injured, I think, but the pair of them have been really consistently available for Newcastle because their fitness levels are very good, and that is as crucial, I think, to Eddie Howe as the character is, as the quality is, as the talent is. And maybe if you think about it in those terms, Anthony Elanga does have pretty much the full package in terms of an Eddie Howe sort of player, and that's exactly why Newcastle are looking at doing this deal. And I really do expect them to get the deal over the line. As I say, I don't want to put a time frame on it because there's still work to do. Broadly, things are in place by the sounds of it. I wouldn't even rule out necessarily that he's with the squad for the Celtic game. I'm sure Newcastle have that in mind in a couple of weeks' time for a potential debut. We'll move on to Giorgio Scalvini. Fabrizio Romano said over the weekend that Newcastle have made contact with Atalanta, but have been told by the club that they'll do everything in their power to keep him, and also other clubs are interested. The cynic in me says that was a very deliberate message to maybe drum up some interest. Maybe Atalanta believe that they can't keep him. Obviously, his value is probably at the lowest point it's going to be in his career. It's certainly the lowest point it's been because of his injury record. He's had this serious knee injury. He's also had that shoulder injury last season. Atalanta's project has a little bit of a question mark over it because even Juric has replaced Gianpiero Gasparini at the helm. His ideology is why they've succeeded so much in the Champions League and won the Europa League a couple of seasons ago as well. This is a deal that I think Newcastle can do. But as I've mentioned before, he's a very, very highly rated player, and if there are other clubs interested and there are clubs looking at the situation with his value, maybe there's an opportunity for others to strike, and that will only bump the price up. But you're looking at, the Times, Martin Hardy wrote about 30 million. I've heard around 40 million as well. So roughly around that money, and especially when you consider what they're paying for Elanga, to be able to get Scalvini, who's got such a high ceiling, it would be a very, very shrewd piece of business. We're also going to talk about Antonio Silva, Benfica defender. Newcastle has scouted extensively over the last couple of years. He was on my alternatives to Mark Gahey video that I did last year. Portuguese media reporting that Newcastle have been interested in a deal for him. He rejected a move to Al Hilal in Saudi Arabia. So I just thought I would talk about him, put him through the FBref test again and see how he stacks up. He stacks up very, very well. Most crucially, 96th percentile for progressive carries, 81st percentile for progressive passes, 94th percentile for assists, 95th percentile for non-penalty expected goals, aerial duels won 64th%. The conclusion I came to last season when I spoke about Antonio Silva was that he is not quite right for me because I think Newcastle need a little bit more pace, but Scalvini doesn't have that either really. So if that is the sort of model of player that Newcastle are looking for as maybe a direct replacement for Fabian Schär, perhaps Antonio Silva could feature if a deal for Giorgio Scalvini doesn't come to fruition. But again, let me know in the comment section what you think about a deal for Antonio Silva. Interesting story that emerged in The Athletic over the weekend. Newcastle are close to appointing a new set-piece coach. Martin Mark from FC Midtjylland in Denmark, 31 years old. I'm not going to pretend to know much about him, but it's all about marginal gains, and this really shows development of modern football, development of modern coaching, and getting those little details right. And this will be a really interesting appointment. Newcastle have been known for being quite innovative with their set pieces over recent years, particularly with Jason Tindall being quite heavily involved with that. Whether Mark would come in to join Tindall or replace Tindall in that regard would be interesting to see. But yeah, very interesting development from the Athletic that Newcastle are looking to add another member of coaching staff, and it really does give you the impression that they are looking to make those marginal gains count, especially going into the Champions League campaign this year. Currently editing the episode, Newcastle just announced that Callum Wilson will be leaving the club after 5 years, and it's really not a surprise, even though there were tentative contract talks over a possible deal. I think he probably thought he wanted to go and play a little bit more, go and find a more secure deal. For Newcastle, it didn't really make sense to even discuss it, in my opinion. Lots of Newcastle fans were very much against it. It just feels like the right time to part ways. Newcastle need a new striker, a new option in behind Isak, as we know. Wilson staying wouldn't have been ideal, but at the same time he deserves every bit of credit. Helped keep the club in the league to get to the point where they were taken over, scored the first goal after the takeover against Spurs, scored in the first win under Eddie Howe against Burnley as well. Reinvented himself in Howe's first full season as Newcastle got into the Champions League, 18 goals, worked really well in tandem with Alexander Isak. I think then was probably the time to sell him and get some money in for him, but the fact that they didn't do that, then he played following on the next season and did really well in the Champions League and in the league. He's a natural goal scorer. He's a wonderful player. Injuries have just absolutely robbed him of being one of the best strikers that England has seen in the last 20 years. He doesn't already qualify as that. It's not been the right choice to keep Callum Wilson on this season, but it was getting quite disappointing to read the narrative around Wilson turning into something quite negative when he's done nothing but brilliant things for Newcastle for 5 years. As I say, when he arrived, nothing really to grab onto in terms of the direction of the club. There was no ambition, no desire for anything above him, and he kept on scoring, he kept on doing well. Whenever he was fit, he tended to score goals, and Alexander Isak's coming in and overshadowed him in the last couple of years. He is the third Premier League top goal scorer for Newcastle and deserves a lot of respect and love. So best of luck to Callum Wilson, and we'll be talking, I'm sure, about potential replacements for him over the next coming weeks. Thanks so much for joining me. It probably wasn't the best update because I don't feel at all well. I really hope you enjoyed it anyway. I'll be back tomorrow for another one. I'll see you then. Cheers.